like to call to order the meeting of the City Lansing Charter Commission. This is the November 12th, 2024 meeting at 6:30. Mr. Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Certainly. Commissioner Adam Simon.
Here.
Commissioner Anderson.
Here.
Commissioner Bauer.
Here.
Commissioner Boyd. Commissioner Boyd is absent. Commissioner Dowd.
Here.
Commissioner Jeffries.
Here.
Commissioner Lopez. Commissioner Cooey.
He's on his way.
Okay.
And if we could get an excused absence.
Okay. And Commissioner Washington. Okay, 7 members present at quorum.
A motion be in order to adopt the agenda. It's been moved. Are there any changes or additions? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The agenda is approved. Now we need a motion to approve the minutes for the October 22nd meeting. Is there a motion?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Are there any changes, deletions, corrections to the minutes? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, minutes are approved. Now we're to public comment.
Okay, we have a number of people submitting, wishing to have public comment tonight. We will start, and each member gets 3 minutes. We'll start with Randy Dykeheis, followed by Loretta Stanaway.
Hi, I'm Randy Dykeheis, 418 North Sycamore, Lansing. I'm here tonight because I want to urge you to not squander the opportunity to hear from folks outside of the usual and normal power structure in the city of Lansing. Last meeting you heard from the mayor and Carol Wood, which is good. I think that you ought to hear from people who are directly affected by the charter on an everyday basis. But please don't ignore the fact that there are a lot of other folks in the city who know a lot about the charter, put a lot of time looking into it and thinking about it. Folks outside of the power structure who are not part of city council, who are not part of the mayor's office, who are not a part of the informal structure like the Chamber of Commerce, the labor council unions, and so on. I think that you were elected with the trust from the voters, that you would take a thorough and comprehensive look at the charter and look at alternatives in a way that we can form, as the Constitution says, a more perfect union. The charter's not terrible, it's not bad, it's not perfect. It can use some tweaking. And I think if you're going to do that, you need to hear from folks who have alternative perspectives. So I strongly urge you at your next meeting to start to line up some of those folks to come up and sit at the table, have a conversation with you, and not be limited to a one-way spew of information for 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Loretta Stanaway, followed by Heath Lowry.
Well, I would piggyback on what Randy just said because it leads right into my first comments, which are relating to the fact that I was so disheartened to see that you already had made a decision that the majority or all of you were going to support staying with a strong mayor. I think you need to realize that the reason you're even here is because there were enough public members frustrated with mayoral and administrative situations that they put together a resistance, and they got you up here to look at that thoroughly and know that there are a lot of folks out here who may not necessarily want strong mayor or city manager, but they at least want it looked at thoroughly and in depth and with a lot of public feedback before that decision is made. I think you've jumped the gun, and I think you've upset and offended a lot of the people that worked so hard to get a city charter commission in place. Second, Board of Water and Light, couple of things there. The last time Mr. Peffley was at the city council meeting, he and Brian Jackson engaged in a back and forth conversation, if you will. I'm not sure it should be called a conversation, but will be nice. Mr. Peffley, I think, made a couple of bad moves PR-wise. One of them was to engage in that back and forth, and the second was to refuse to answer Jackson's questions. He was not taking, I think, into account the fact that the public did not have access to the documents he was referring to. Maybe they could have gone online and got them, yes, but most of the public watching that meeting would not have done so and will not have done so. It would have taken no skin off of his nose to answer those questions so the public could see it on the record in a meeting. Also, the Board of Water and Light, with their two-tiered rating system now for the timed use, they say on their documentation that you get holidays, Saturdays, and Sundays at the lower rate tier. They do not specify and point out and make known that the city has 13 holidays. 6 of those, you get the lower rates. You do not get the lower rates on those other 7 holidays, and I think people are going to be bushwhacked when they find that out when their bills come out. So I think that in terms of good PR, the board needs to say on the bills going out next month or somewhere very official, you only get these 6 specific holidays, you don't get the other 7. And lastly, nobody has been able to answer for me yet why we are not looking at hydroelectric power. We are surrounded by water. We have used hydroelectric in the past. It is a clean energy source, and I cannot see why we aren't doing something with it. If there's a legitimate and good reason, I wish somebody would please tell me what that is. And as far as city council structure goes, my vote's for 5 wards, with the 4th ward being the biggest ward being split into another ward. So there's 5 wards and 2 at large. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Heath Lowry, followed by Amara Tiller.
Good evening. As was stated, my name is Heath Lowry, a resident of the West Side in the 4th Ward. I stand before you today because as I was putting my daughter to bed and watching you all deliberate in this most recent meeting, I was sort of struck by some of the verbiage that was used, both in the presentation and the response to it, regarding the ward-based versus at-large-based representation on City Council. I'm here to advocate, frankly, for the expansion of ward-based representation, mainly because of many of the things that were mentioned in that meeting. It builds a structure that will properly represent historically marginalized communities. Ward-based representation, while they may serve a smaller geographic region, serves a higher diversity of viewpoints as opposed to an at-large representation, which may serve a large geographic area, but political science, article after political science article, has found that they tend to represent a smaller ideological or business interest versus a geographical interest. So they may be more parochial in their responses than even a ward would be. Often at-large is touted as something that is efficient and less political. Those are euphemisms, in my opinion. Those are easier ways of saying how easily can we ignore marginalized and specialized interests of smaller, disenfranchised groups, frankly speaking, because efficiency is just what do we find important and only sticking with that importance. Wards right now represent roughly 28,000 people, and at-large is supposed to represent 113,000 people per at-large. And I know you've spoken with anecdotally the former council members and current council members who may think that they're doing a good job in that representation, but people, especially people in power, have a limited ability to understand their own shortcomings, so they may not know that they're trying to do too much and cannot actively commit to serving people as they want to be served. And in the end, I've asked this through the entire process, people want a responsive government, and improving the voice of people by allowing them have opportunities that have representatives that most closely represent them, both in diversity of socioeconomic diversity, ethnic and racial diversity. That is found, again, in study after study to be more likely to be brought by ward-based representation than at large. Right now, we're lucky to have a city council that, no matter what kind of position they are in, they come from a marginalized group of some sort. So you can't take, Lansing may be an outlier, but we need to think for systems in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Amara Tiller, followed by Mike Marriott.
Good evening, members of the City Charter Commission. My name is Amara Tiller. I am a home owner in Lansing, a mother, and a future naturopathic doctor. I stand before you today to urge a reevaluation of adding fluoride to our public water supply. In August 2023, during my naturopathic studies, I discovered the dangers of fluoride, which compelled me to resign from my position at the Lansing Board of Water and Light, a company I could no longer support. As leaders responsible for Lansing's well-being, it is crucial to consider compelling evidence in recent federal rulings highlighting fluoride's potential harm. September 2024, a federal ruling identified fluoride as a neurotoxin posing unreasonable health risks. This ruling resulted from a significant lawsuit against the EPA and aligns with findings that fluoride can reduce a child's IQ. Higher levels of fluoride in the urine of pregnant mothers are correlated with lower IQ levels in their children. Given these findings, many U.S. women, including those in Lansing, face exposure levels that put their children at risk. More information on this ruling can be found on the Fluoride Action Network website. Our children are our future, and it is our duty to protect their potential from preventative environmental threats. By discontinuing fluoride in our water, we take a necessary step to secure the cognitive well-being of future generations. In addition to cognitive impact, research ties fluoride to thyroid dysfunction, skeletal fluorosis, and endocrine disruption. Failing to act could harm thousands more, especially those unable to afford costly filtration systems. Unlike cavities, which can be filled, brain damage is irreversible with lifelong consequences. The public did not consent to a water additive that risks brain health. Lansing has already shown its commitment to health by being the second city nationally to remove lead pipes. This proactive stance is why I was proud to work for the Lansing Board of Water and Light. This proactive stance should extend to fluoride removal to align with recent health guidelines. Let's reaffirm our dedication to public health and leadership. By removing fluoride, we set a vital example for other cities prioritizing our community's wellness. Thank you for considering this essential issue. Together, let's forge a healthier future for Lansing.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Mike Marriott, followed by Deirdre Thompson.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Mike Marriott, Lansing resident of the Churchill Downs neighborhood in the 3rd Ward, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the city council structure. I got you guys a document to look at. Basically, this is an idea for a 9-member council. I know a couple of the charter commissioners had said, bring us specific ideas, so here's a specific idea. The 4 wards stay the way they are, and each has a representative. We then create 4 quadrants, which are made up of the wards, so a northern quadrant, a southern quadrant, an eastern quadrant, and a western quadrant. Wards 1 and 4 vote in the north, 2 and 3 in the south, 1 and 2 in the east, and 3 and 4 in the west. This allows, what this basically does is gives you 3 individual council members for your area. So if you live in Southwest Lansing, you have your ward council member, you also have your Western Quadrant council member, and then you have your Southern Quadrant council member. It overlaps a little bit, but this way everybody's getting some representation. It also then cuts back on the at-large. I know there was some stuff raised about people running and how much it costs and things like that. This way you would only have to campaign in half of the city instead of the entire city. I'm a big believer in not creating, not thinking inside the box or outside the box, but creating a new box. And that's the thing when I talked to you guys at the Churchill Downs commission meeting, that, be bold, why not do something that other cities aren't doing? Why not be an example? We're one of 50. Let's be proud of that. And so that's kind of my idea. You guys can take a look at that, and if you think this is a terrible idea, that's fine. If you think it's a great idea or helps you get your mind going, that's really what I want. But let's jump into the 21st century, Lansing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next, we have Deirdre Thompson, followed by Frederick McLaughlin.
Good evening. I'm Deirdre Thompson. I'm actually a resident of DeWitt, but I have Board and Water and Light City Water, and that's why I'm here to talk to you today, and I thank you for this opportunity. In light of the recent federal court ruling that found that water fluoridation poses an unreasonable risk to children, I'm here to request that the City of Lansing and the Lansing Board of Water and Light stop using fluoride in the water supply. Fluoride is the only chemical additive to water for the purpose of a medical treatment. It's added for the intent to stop tooth decay, which is not a waterborne disease. An individual can choose whether or not to use toothpaste or mouthwash that has fluoride in it, but they cannot choose whether or not the water they drink has fluoride in it, and therefore they do not have informed consent for a medical treatment. Filtering fluoride out of the drinking water is expensive, and it places a large financial burden on families who would like to do this. Fluoride accumulates in the body. Healthy kidneys can only remove 50 to 60% of fluoride ingested. There's not been one single randomized trial provided for the safety or effectiveness of fluoride. In fact, the FDA still classifies fluoride as an unapproved new drug after all these years. The CDC has acknowledged that any benefit of fluoride is a topical, not systematic. An NIH study found no significant relationship between tooth decay and fluoride intake in children. And despite fluoridation, low-income communities still have significant oral health crises. Most Western industrial countries have rejected fluoridation. And I think it's time that our country also comes on board. At high doses, fluoride is a potential poison that is almost on par with arsenic. It was used for years to kill rodents, and it's still being used as a pesticide. There are 85 human studies linking fluoride exposure with reduced intelligence, over 60 animal studies reporting that mice or rats ingesting fluoride have an impaired capacity to learn. There are 12 studies linking fluoride with the impaired visual, spatial, organization abilities. There's 3 human studies linking fluoride exposure with impaired fetal brain development. In 2012, Harvard ran a meta-analysis, and they found a relationship between elevated fluoride and reduced IQ. In 2006, Harvard review found fluorides have the ability to interfere with functions of the brain. In addition, the National Research Council expressed a concern that fluorides can possibly contribute to dementia as well. And this is just scratching the surface. There's evidence that fluoridation affects all systems of the body. And with that, I would encourage you and urge you to stop fluoridation in our water. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Next is Frederick McLaughlin, followed by Elaine Fishoff, a virtual participant.
Thank you for your time. I'm going to repeat my request that there be a focus on the planning section of the charter, and that it do away with the economic development citation and instead insert a citation that talks about community development. I think for the couple of minutes I came in a little bit late, but that's what I hear being talked about is the community. Community is a bigger concept than economic development. It includes economic development, but it's a bigger concept. And there are a variety of interesting concepts out there that are taking hold throughout the country. One of them I learned about recently, which is, it addresses, in fact, the title of the book is The High Cost of Free Parking. What it proposes to do, this is just an example of interesting concepts out there, is that all free parking become paid parking, and that all the money that comes in from that parking is given over to the block that the stores face out on or the buildings face out on, and they benefit from the money that comes in from the parking. What they've found is they actually make quite a bit of money that's useful to those people along that frontage for helping with the appearance of the street. I guess I'll just leave it at that, but the look of the street as well as the nature of the businesses themselves. The other possibilities is mixing different densities of residences. And as you think about this, given that we're all, so many of us are homeowners, I urge you to think about your capacity here as a representative rather than an owner of a residence. The mixture of densities does away with the single-family residence requirement. It still allows for single-family homes, of course. This loosens up lot sizes, allows for duplexes, quadplexes, doesn't put in multi-story buildings, which I can appreciate the implications of that as an architect. And I've mentioned a reference that I'll repeat again. It's called Arbitrary Lines. The author's name is Gray. And I've sent, I think, out to you earlier clips of some articles. I can't recall if I included the video interviews with the author. And the author of the High Cost of Free Parking is Donald Shoup, S-H-O-U-P. And I'll send out some clips from that as well for you to take a look at. But something needs to be done to loosen up the property and allow actually more construction.
Thank you. And our final speaker signed in is Elaine Fishoff, virtual participant. Jack, do we have Elaine? Is Elaine on? Elaine needs to unmute her mic. Okay, it doesn't look like maybe we're going to hear from Elaine tonight. That's it. So we are to officer reports.
Under the chair's report, I have none. Madam Vice Chair.
No report for the vice chair.
Mr. Clerk.
I will follow suit.
Did you have a busy week? All right, now's the time for presentations. We have the Board of Water and Light with us tonight. Folks just want to come down and take a seat at the table. It's all yours.
Good evening, and thanks for having us here today. My name is David Price. I've been a resident of Lansing and a homeowner for over 30 years. I currently serve on the Board of Commissioners for the BWL for 13 years and currently am the chair. I've been actively involved in my community all my life and served on a variety of different boards, including the Michigan Nonprofit Association, the Michigan Community Service Commission, and the Michigan Rehabilitation Association. This is one of the best boards I've served on. I continue to be impressed by Dick Peffley's leadership and BWL management, who we work with collaboratively to move the BWL forward. As you know, BWL has deep roots in this community dating back to 1885 and has always been an outstanding community partner. BWL has many layers of accountability. Our Board of Commissioners hold our employees, and we only have three as the board: the general manager, the corporate secretary, and the internal auditor. And we hold those folks accountable throughout the year. The board conducts annual performance reviews of these employees and discusses and approves BWL policies with them at committees and board meetings. The board has fired 3 employees since I've been on the board. Our commissioners also receive monthly reports and updates covering all operational aspects of the company. Our board holds each other accountable by lengthy discussions and respectful disagreements. Much of the work of this body is done in our committees, where we deliberate the policies that shape the BWL. These recommendations are then forwarded to the full board for approval. An example of this is our review of BWL's 2026 to 2030 strategic plan, which took place at our Committee of the Whole meeting last week. That document was the result of thoughtful conversations that took place to shape that document between the board and BWL management, and we will use those goals created by the strategic plan to hold management accountable through its duration. The plan will be put to a vote at our next board meeting, which takes place next Tuesday night. Our board is also accountable to the mayor, who appoints us, and the city council, who confirms us. I commend you for voting to keep the strong mayor system. With the mayor appointing boards and commissions, council maintains veto authority over these appointments. For your information, Mayor Shore has replaced half of the BW commissioners with council confirmation. Most importantly, we are accountable to our ratepayers. We are an accessible board and company. Our meetings are open to the public with the opportunity for public comment on agenda items, as well as any other topic that they wish to address. Our employees are accessible via phone, email, and in person at our HACO lobby. At this point, I'd like to hand this over to General Manager Peffley to dive further into how the charter impacts the BWL.
Thank you, Chair Price. Good evening. Thank you for allowing me to present tonight. I am, for the record, Dick Peffley, General Manager of the Lansing Board of Water and Light. Some background on the board. The board is a public utility owned by the city. We're one of 40 public utilities in the state. We're the largest one, probably larger than all the other ones combined. And there's 2,000 public utilities nationwide. We're in the top 25 for size. We currently have 100,000 electric customers, 58,000 water customers, 161 steam customers, and 19 chilled water customers. In this day and age, being in the utility business is a tough business to be in. It's very hard. We are the only industry in the world that has to produce its product, deliver its product, and have it consumed instantaneously. Any hiccup in that results in an outage. We also are like a three-legged stool. We have a balancing act. We have to balance reliability, affordability, and sustainability. And we have residents, customers that come to our board meeting, and they speak to us about that. Typically, one of those is their issue. And when we take and listen to them and get back and take their feedback into account, if the outcome isn't what they expected, we're labeled as being non-transparent. Now, we are very, very transparent. And I can tell you right now that I followed some of your meetings, and I watched the strong mayor discussions, and I watched how you engaged, listened to what the folks said that came up to the microphones and reviewed the emails. And after multiple meetings, you took and decided that unanimously that you were going to stay with a strong mayor. So we're supposed to work. Next day on social media, I saw you were lacquered. You weren't transparent. You weren't being accountable as a rubber stamp board. You didn't deserve that. You did a good job the way that you deliberated on it. Well, this is my world every day. And if we weren't transparent, it would have been very easy to take, and I heard we were pretty much flying under the radar until we did a rate increase. We could have pushed that rate increase for a year, just add 1% to it, and your job would be done, and we'd have flown under the radar. But we don't work like that. We brought the rate strategy forward, and we implemented it. It was a 2-year strategy. And I want to talk to you a little bit about that strategy because it was an expensive strategy. We understand it, but we have to go back a ways. During COVID, we went without a rate increase for almost 3 years during some of the highest inflation we've ever seen. We did not shut our customers' power off during COVID. even before the state mandated it, we were losing $10 million a month in uncollected bills. And we just couldn't survive long periods of time doing that, but we did. We never interrupted service. We kept our high level of service, but everybody was hurting. And we depleted our cash reserves down to make sure that we continued to support the residents during COVID. Now, even with that rate strategy in place, we are still considerably under our closest competitor, and they have a 10% rate hike pending right now with the MPSC. So it's still a very good value to be a Board of Water and Light customer. If you're going to locate outside this area, you're going to pay more for your utilities. That's just a fact. Some folks have asked us, what are you doing with the money that you brought in? It's a great question. Well, some of it's inflation. We have to take and keep up. Our rate hikes over the last 10 years have been under inflation, so we're doing more with less. We also bonded for $325 million to do new energy projects, so we'll be in compliance with some state laws that have changed, and we have to pay that money back. Also, water. I heard a lot about drinking water tonight, and we have embarked on changing out all of our water mains, 800 miles of water main. If you remember, and I heard it earlier, we were the first city in the country to start taking out lead services. Now we finished second, but I'll take that. Now we're looking at changing out water mains, and it's very, very expensive because it is the customer's right to always get safe drinking water. And as we do these projects, we spend a lot of capital money, and we need to continue down that road. So that's where some of the money goes for. So we also hear that lack of accountability, that sometimes we're not accountable. Chair Price touched on it a little bit. We are accountable. We're accountable to the commission, to the mayor, to the city council. 3 weeks ago, the city council sent us 20 questions they wanted to answer. We took and we answered those questions. We came down, sat right here, and went over the questions that they wanted to have us to respond to. And we also had follow-up questions. Within a week, we answered those. Every question and answer was put on our website for everybody to see. That's accountability right there. We are among the highest regulated companies in the country, utilities are. We fall under NERC standards, that's a branch of the government standards. There are 58 standards, but they have 900 requirements under those standards that we have to be held accountable to. We have a whole department to just make sure that we're accountable there. In addition to that, we have to comply with the drinking water regulations, the clean air regulations, regulations around pollution and waste. We comply with all that, but we go one step farther. We are the only company that has a generating facility in this country that's ISO certified. And when businesses look to locate in an area and they know that a company is ISO certified, it becomes the top of their list so that they look to locate in this area. Keep in mind, 20% of our customers are commercial industrial. That's 80% of our revenue. So that helps us keep our residential rates down by economy of scale. One rate class doesn't subsidize another. It's just the economy of scale that gets us there. Back to accountability. We had an ice storm about 12 years ago. That entire administration is gone. That's the ultimate in accountability. Last August, we had a tornado come through. More outages during the ice storm. All customers restored in half the time. We learned our lesson. We were summoned down to council, but it wasn't to get yelled at. It was to get thanked for getting our customers back. We got letters of accommodation from the state of Michigan, representatives in Congress saying, wow, look what you did, and we're comparing you to other utilities. So what does that do for us too? If we got $1 million in grants in years past, we were happy. Last year, the state of Michigan, through different grants, gave us $90 million because we're the preferred utility. The MPSC doesn't even regulate us. They gave us $10 million to put in batteries. And then they reached out and said, listen, we're going to be auditing the other two large investor-owned utilities. We would like to work with you. We would like a copy of your policies and procedures for transmission distribution because we've reviewed what you've done. They are the best. We want the rest of the state's utilities to follow that. And we're working with them to do that. And all that does is make us more of an economic development tool. There would be no $2.5 billion Ultium battery plant in this region if it wasn't for the Board of Water and Light. They're here because of the work that we did. And it's very important to note, there's no subsidies there. The state of Michigan may give them funding, but they pay their share for Board of Water and Light. No Board of Water and Light customer subsidize them, and they're close to finishing their construction, and they'll become a customer that drives economic development. The VWL 7 years ago was about a $700 million company. We just passed the $2 billion mark, and we do that by bringing in new customers, not on the back of our existing customers. Again, nobody wants to raise rates. I hated doing that, but we had to catch up. So what do we do for the city? We are engaged with the city every day. We were out here last week helping them set those big red balls in a turning circle. We're out there decorating a holiday tree. We're hanging the wreaths. We're sponsoring the drone show. We do Adopt a River. We used to do the chili cook-off. I can go on forever because we are hometown people, hometown power. We have a great relationship with the city. And also, we'll pay them $26 million on the rate of return this year. It's increased every year, and it's a guaranteed rate that they're getting this year, and it's a big chunk of their revenue, and it's a very fair return for a company, a city that owns you. So we do get customer calls, and I want to let you see if any of you can find another company that every customer that reaches out to us gets followed up with in one business day. Now, sometimes the answer isn't exactly what they want to hear. We understand that, but they're treated with compassion and respect. So, the board's had an independent board for 100 years, and it's worked really well. It's not subject to the politics of the short term. The board members, when they talk to me, they look long term. So we don't get hung up in an election cycle. We get to look and see what's best for the city and the community over long term. And sometimes short term, those are unpopular decisions that the board has to make. They hold us accountable. So we have submitted some charter language. It's really cleanup language. We're happy to answer any of those questions. In fact, it'd probably be my counsel who's behind me. He helps put that together. But in closing, I guess, if it's not broke, don't fix it. We think the charter allows us to continue to be an economic tool, support our customers, and open to take any questions. Thank you again for allowing me to speak this evening.
Thank you for coming down. Are there any questions? Commissioner Washington.
Thank you, Dick. I really appreciated that. I just have a couple questions. Two of them are, as long as we're all here, let's get them answered. Can you talk about hydropower?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I love hydropower. I don't think you could get one licensed. There's too many environmental risks that come with them. There's fish kill, there's fish eggs. It's very, very hard. We have 2 hydro dams, and the permitting process is more money than the revenue than you get from the dam. So unfortunately, Consumers Energy is looking, another utility is looking to unload all their hydro.
Okay. I appreciate that. And can you address the fluoride in the water?
I can. The Board of Water and Light takes no position on fluoride. That's a requirement by the city of Lansing, so that would fall back on the city, not throwing the city under the bus.
Sure.
But if they want to reach out and say, don't put fluoride in the water, we'll shut it off tomorrow.
Okay. Well, great. That's good to know, because if it affects the intelligence and dementia, I need all my brain cells, and I kind of like it gone if that's what the studies are showing. But I'm one person. And then I just have one more thing. I just wanted to, I know, I talked to you earlier about this, but I do want to ask it now. I am an environmentalist.
Yes.
I make no apologies. You know, you all came and put the solar on my roof. And,
Yes.
But I would like you to talk to the mayor and have at some point at least one commissioner from one of our environmental groups to represent the environmentalists in the city, not only for them to bring their voice, but also for them to understand what happens within the Board of Water and Light. I know before you were the director, it was when Peter Lark was in, and I had first come on council, and I did the resolution for 20% renewables by 2020. The Board of Water and Light far exceeded what I had asked for. So I just think, in these times, and particularly, we may see some lessening of the environmental standards that we expect right now with the new administration that we have, and I'm really hoping that our utility company will stay the course with clean renewables.
Thank you for those comments. Definitely will consider those. And for the record, no matter where the government goes, we will be 50% renewable energy by 2030. There is no waffling on that. I don't think my bosses would allow it. We have a plan to get really 53%. We want to hedge it a little bit, but we are leading the pack, hence the rate increase. It's the right thing to do, but it's not cheap.
Just one more. People have asked that, and I don't even know what the route would be. I would think it would be to go to the Board of Water and Light Commission meetings, but they went the 9% for 2 years in a row. That's kind of pricey for a lot of people. They're already living on the edge. You know, we're not a wealthy town. Our household income is about $40,000 less than every surrounding township and city that touches our border. But is the best way, I guess, what's the best way to address the rate increases for the residents, maybe before they actually take place?
Yes, they're discussed at different levels 6 months in advance, and we advertise and we push it out. And when we had the rate hearing, there was about 21 speakers. 10 of them were there on environmental issues, but there was about 10 on concerned about the rates. I know we got with 8 of them, and half of them we were able to help. One lady that had, and one individual that had a very high rate, found there was a pipe leaking in their basement. We were able to help them, and now we have sources that we can get to the customers to help them bring funding in, because the last thing you want to do is turn a customer off. And but again, we can work with them, and hopefully, you know, things will change, inflation will come, and we'll be able to get our rates increases much smaller. But again, we went 3 years without one, and because they were approved by the commission. I went to the commission during COVID and said, we got to suspend these. I said, the customers can't pay it now, but I understand this last one is a little bit of sticker shock. We did go to a 2-tier water system, which is pretty rare. So if you stay under 2 CCF, that 9% is like $1.36, and I know that all adds up. But it's if you can stay under that, and everybody gets that for that low rate. But if you go over it, you pay the higher rate. And same thing with the time of use. And I did hear the holiday thing. I will be looking into that too.
I'd also like to comment that 2 things that the BWL has done. One is we have opted into Public Act 95 from the state, which frees up additional funds through Department of Human Services to help people with their utility bills. Also, there have been a number of community outreach fairs, if you will. And how many have we had now, Dick, where resources are available not just to help pay your utility bills, but for housing and food? And that was something that we initiated and brought the partners together and did it in the communities, and we'll continue to do those things to help people pay. You know, when it's a struggle sometimes. I mean, I'm a ratepayer. I'm not a stockholder. You know, in fact, somebody asked me recently, well, does BWL pay for your retirement? I said, yeah, they give me the same thing they do as a salary, so it's nothing. So we're there, and we struggle. Believe me, when you have a customer come up to the podium when you're doing a rate hearing, it hurts all of us. You know, it really, really does. And yet we've got to keep the company going too. So it's that reliability, sustainability, and affordability that Dick mentioned. And it's always a juggling act for sure. And we listen, you know, because we're affected. I pay that bill too, you know, and I'm retired, so I get it.
Thank you, Mr. Brooks.
Vice Chair.
Okay. No, I have 3, so if you have 1, go ahead.
I think it's great that you announced 6 months in advance before you proceed with a rate increase. How are the consumers notified about that in that 6 months? Is it in a bill, or how do they go?
There's bills. We do it through social media. We're required to put a statement in local media, like the newspaper, so people can see it there. It's on our website. It's talked about in our budgeting process, like in the spring, if you're going to do a fall one. So it starts, and the press always picks it up. The board's thinking about a rate hike, and you know, so it's out there. But then sometimes it doesn't hit the home until all of a sudden, you know, here it is. And it has been one of our larger ones, and you know, do everything we can to minimize that going forward, so that typically we get 4 or 5 people that come and speak to us, but they're smaller in the past, but now we've got a mechanism to catch up from where we were and comply with some new regulations that'll be taking effect. So, but the best way is, we push it out. We're not shy about it because, we want people to come tell us, and we listen to them. I've already told staff, I said, we're not doing this again, we got to make sure that we've looked under every rock, that we've cut every corner before we bring another rate strategy forward. We did 2-year strategy so that people could see, and also it helps the commercial business community so they can plan. They don't wonder what you're doing, are they going to have another like this? So we laid it all out for them. You're welcome.
I have on speakers list Vice Chair Simon and then Commissioner Bauer.
Thank you. Thank you, Board Chair Price and General Manager Pepley. I have 3 questions, and really they're coming from residents. But when you talk about accountability to the city, what does that look like? What are you reporting back to the city? Because currently you do internal audits and external audits.
Mm-hmm.
Who sees those results?
The commission sees those. Our commission sees those, but anybody that's at the commission meeting could see them. Anybody that requested them could get a copy of them.
Okay, thank you. And then as far as your board members, currently you have 3 board members that don't have voting power. What is the purpose to have 3 board members that cannot vote?
Let me address that.
Okay.
That occurred after the ice storm
Mhm.
in 2013. And there was a reaction from some of our customers, East Lansing, Delta, and others, that they wanted to know more about what was going on with the Board of Water and Light. I actually made a presentation at that time that we needed to form a committee of all those customers outside of the city of Lansing. That initiative didn't make it. Instead, a charter amendment was proposed that you have now that would grant membership but not voting rights to the outlying customers. And we've had discussions, not within our board, but one-to-one, where some of those members would like a vote. To me, that's like me being a customer at Home Depot saying I belong on the board because I buy stuff at Home Depot. They're customers. You guys, the city, owns the Board of Water and Light. The 8 commissioners who vote have a fiduciary responsibility to the Board of Water and Light and the city of Lansing. Those outlying board members without a vote don't have that same fiduciary responsibility. They don't have that ownership. So does that help?
That does help. Thank you very much.
I'd like to put a finer point on that
Okay.
too, not to disagree with the chair, but I agreed with him when we had 3 non-voting board members, but we have a lot more community that we serve that aren't represented. So I started about 5 years ago a general manager's roundtable. I know some of you have been to it, so that anybody that wanted to come in and sit down and talk to us, we meet quarterly, and you could hear what's going on. I would go over what I talked at the board meeting, the COW meeting. They could ask me for a presentation. It was started that we had like 20 people, business people, anybody that wanted to come in there could sit and listen. And after first year, they were going to roll off. We were going to go to a different group, but none of them wanted to leave. It's like 60 of those folks now that come out quarterly, and they listen to what we have to say, because just having 3 individuals represent the outlying areas, and only a third of those represent outlying areas. The rest of them are internal to Lansing, Michigan, are into Lansing. So we continue to do that, and we meet quarterly. So if you have anybody that's interested and wants to sit in that, you can get with us, and we'll make space for you.
Okay. And my last question, what is the board's current policy on shutting off power when there is a person in the home that is medically dependent on power?
Shut the energy off to people who has a medical issue. Right now, it's a case by case. We know that there's some groups that are looking to have a state mandate put in place, and of course we would follow that, and we actually are working with one of those individuals now. We look at that, and we have a way to flag if somebody's on some kind of apparatus that has to have energy. If there's a turnoff order, we would go out and reach out to them prior to that happening. So it's case by case because sometimes what folks have, we just have to evaluate it, and we do.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Commissioner Bauer.
My question was what you thought about having the 3 members vote, but I think you answered it.
Yes, that would be David.
Having the 3 members,
Well, I think I think that was also the vice chair's question, so I think you answered the question that you don't. We've received some letters about having the non-members have a vote on the board, and I think you answered why you feel.
well, I think we could sell them a share, the city could come up with the price, and then they could buy in. So, I mean, it really boils down to who owns the Board of Water and Light. As much as we love our customers in Delta and East Lansing and Holt and DeWitt, they're customers. We represent the city. We represent the owners, and that's a huge difference. I think. So, yeah.
Commissioner Lopez.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. Just a couple of questions. How much power is generated by solar panels, solar power, like VWL?
Right now, probably about 21%. I'm going to turn around. I know somebody behind me that has all. I don't want to be wrong to you. Mark.
Solar and wind, 21%.
Solar and wind is 21%. I was right.
Solar and wind.
And wind, yes. And we have a half a dozen large projects in the work right now. Construction is going to start pretty quick. We're working with a group to expand our wind portfolio, which is probably the hardest job you've ever seen because of zoning, trying to get it zoned. Solar's a little easier, and we are looking to build out 5 large solar installations here over the next year. Well, the panels are being stored at the Sears building right now. They're here. We're working on the land agreements. The advantage to building it in our service territory, too, is that we don't have to pay transmission costs to get that energy back. The Board of Light is one of the very few utilities in the state that owns its own grid. And if you don't, it's like renting a truck to get your product from A to B. If we generate that elsewhere, we have to pay to put it on the grid. And ITC is the grid operator, and their rates have gone up 8% every year that I can remember. So we can control a lot of that. Hence why the LG plant located here, we could guarantee transmission rates. So those solar panels, there's multiple locations that we're going to start breaking ground on. We've got most of the land procured. The panels, as David said, are here. And that's what will get us to the 50% clean energy by 2030. It's all going to be solar and wind. We are investing in battery technology, but you don't get any. There's no credit for battery technology when it comes to renewables.
So you said 21% solar and wind, right?
Total, yes.
Total, okay. On rates, do you ever publish your rates versus the other companies?
We do comparisons, but we haven't published them. So the answer is no, we haven't done that.
Some people complain that we're too high, but we don't know what to compare it to.
Typically, we run 10% under our nearest competitor. We've been as high as 19%. We've been as low as 5% because there's timing. Right now, our rates are a little tighter than like because we're the leader in renewables. We are going to get there. And anybody that comes along later to get to the 50% like we're saying by 2030 is going to pay more because they're not getting cheaper. That's why even though we weren't ready for the solar panels, we bought all of them last year and we're storing them until we can use them because it was cheaper to do so. And I think a lot of incentives on that are going to dry up with a change in administration at the government level. You're welcome.
Other questions? Commissioner Anderson.
Thanks for being here. So I just have a few questions. I know we talked about transparency, especially when it comes to rate increases. And I just looked back at the Board of Water and Light's Facebook to like early September. I didn't see a single post about potential rate increases over a 2-month period. And I would say now a lot of people get their information from social media. It's just the reality of today. So I think, you know, when I hear that we're posting it everywhere, we're sharing it everywhere, it's not necessarily accurate and maybe in alignment with where people are getting their information today. Also, when we talk about, you know, just 8 people came and we're speaking about rate increases, and when the Board of Water and Light posted about the new water tower and the painting, over 100 people commented, over 60 people shared it, and I would say about 95% or more were regarding their rates and people being unhappy. And so, you know, I guess I would like to hear from you of like what efforts do you think can come forth going forward with being more transparent regarding rate increases? And I think specifically like educating people on what they're for. Like you said, they were for inflation, to pay back a millage, for changing 800 miles of water main. Share like that information I don't feel like is being shared in a public way for people to understand what they're paying for. So I guess like, what is the plan going forward for communicating these things?
Here's what I'd like to do is I'd like to get our communications people to put together exactly where they pushed all this information out and share that with this group, and it appears that in some areas we missed the boat. How do we do it better next time? And we're very happy to do that. And the water tower, you're right, we followed that, and you know there was a lot of misinformation on that. That tower was free. The state of Michigan gave us $33 million to put that tower up, paid for everything because of our work with lead service pipes. And that water tower is huge for the water customers. A rate increase at 9%. I know you want to hear this, but we worked really hard to get it down from double digits, because what that tower does is it allows them, the water utility will fill that tower at night when our rates are down, and then during the day when our electric rates come up during peak, they draw that tower down so they don't have to pump water. So it's a big win for the water customers, but you know, trying to continually battle that is you know, people think, wow, they spent money, it's all painted. And the neighborhood where that tower sits was engaged. And when we look at the neighborhood engagement there on that, it was very positive, because this is what they wanted. We were gonna have these fancy lights at one time, and we don't like that. We want, you know, a paint scheme, because it's located in Lansing Township. So Lansing Township is the one that has the say in our view of what should be done with that tower. But yeah, I'd like to get the information gathered together and submit it, and we'd appreciate feedback to see, you know, because you know down the road there'll be another rate increase, and you know I'd like to be able to say, hey, we looked at this, we made a change, we pushed it out more.
Yeah. So question about accountability. So if those 160 people had showed up for public comment, for example, and all spoke against the rate increase, how would you guys have moved forward with that type of input?
Well, the commission would send us back and say, can you cut budgets? Can you do anything? Is this absolutely necessary? It definitely would, you know, we thought long and hard before we brought it forward, but we go back and think, is there anything we can do different? And, you know, it doesn't fall on deaf ears. And we know, and we gauge it. We know just because only 8 people spoke against it, there was a lot of unhappy people. We gauged that. During the ice storm, hundreds of people came to the meeting, so that meant thousands of people weren't happy. You gauge the amount that come out versus the ones that are there. So we looked at that, and but it's you know, we don't like raising rates, and you know, but we had to continue to move some of these projects forward because they're required by law. But you know, it just makes you think harder. Is there anything that you're doing in the company that you don't need to do that could offset a rating strategy?
Right. Yeah, for sure.
Again, looking at when we had lots of people show up for something, and I was around when the ice storm happened, we had lots and lots of people, angry people. I likened it to a presentation I did with, they showed up with torches and pitchforks, you know, and you all seen that movie with, in Dracula's castle. That's what it was like, and we did something about it. And eventually, the general manager was let go as a result of that. There were reports that faulted us all over the place, that we could have done so much better on so many things, including tree trimming, which we instituted a significant plan, which, again, we heard a lot of negativity about that, because people don't want their trees cut. On the other hand, they don't want their power out. So, those are the kind of things where we have been responsive. And on rates, we listen too. There's no question that we listen. And it's a struggle for the commissioners to make that vote. But I think we listen to management too and think, what are these things going to be used for? Did we communicate that well enough? Obviously, not to everybody, because you wouldn't be saying it if it wasn't true, and I believe you. And communication is difficult. The mainstream media, if you will, is not the way most people get their information anymore. And then, do they get it on Facebook now? Facebook's being now. How do they get it? The Instagram? I don't know. It drives me crazy sometimes. How do you get information out to the public? And it's something I know our communications people are working on all the time. And a lot of them are here tonight, and I know that they'll take your comments very seriously. So thank you for those.
Thank you. Can we talk about a little bit about what your year-end financials look like? I would say probably for the past 5 years, just off the top of your head, has there been a surplus? Has there been a shortfall? How are those surplus funds used? I know there's a cash reserve, but what does all of that look like?
Well, our budget over the last 5 years is usually within 2 or 3% of projected. So any surplus would be used to offset a rate strategy and any deficit, which they're fairly small. Our revenue is about $450 million a year, so be within 4 or 5% is really good. And last year we were under about $10 million because of the tornado that came through. We didn't budget for that, and that hit us hard. But the year before we had a positive year. COVID, we were off on sales. And what it does is if we're really off on revenue, then we will look to scale back capital work. It just doesn't, because you missed your revenue curves, you just don't raise rates. You look to see, okay, we're doing $70 million in capital. Can we do $60 million this year? But we're over the last 5 years, we've been very, very close on our projections. So be happy to put that in percentage for you, but I don't think we've missed by plus or minus 5% on a budget that size in the last 5 years.
Okay. So I just want to make sure that I'm understanding what you're saying.
No problem.
So you're talking about your budget.
Yes.
Are you guys receiving more money than what you anticipated receiving in rates?
No, we do not.
Okay.
Nope.
Okay. And then I think this is my last question. A resident brought a suggestion up of having 2 city council members on the Board of Water and Lights Board, with voting rights. How do you think that would positively or negatively impact the work that you guys do?
Well, I have a very good relationship with 7 of the council members. Maybe that'll wash out tonight, but that would be disastrous because they have to run for election, they have to get appointed, and I know how if you're running for office and we had this rate strategy, you wouldn't be there. You can't run a utility of politics. You have to do what's best long-term for your customers, and those decisions are tough when your job's being held over you. I don't fault the council folks that would do other way. They're running, you got a whole line of people, 160 people showing up saying, don't raise the rates. They say don't. What are the negative consequences? We've seen the negative consequences. 12 years ago, we were among the worst utilities for reliability. Last year, before the tornado came through, we were tied for first. We have a 10 times faster restoration rate than our nearest competitor. Our average outage is 55 minutes. It took a little bit of a hit during the tornado, but that rolled off about a month ago. So we're back to being best in class. That cost. And we got into the ice storm problems because management back then cut the budget because they were under pressure, and the first thing they did away with was tree trimming, and it caught up with them. And that's politics drives that. The board, once the commission the mayor asks to put them on, and the council approves them, and it's a perfect balance act because the council would say no, then they still represent their wards or at large, but they looked long-term. What's the best for these customers? And short-term will just, wouldn't get you where we are, and that's how the company has had growth, and it's not on the back of existing customers. I'll put our rates up, maybe we'll post what they are to our nearest utility. I really don't want to poke that bear, but bottom line is it's a very good value for your electric rates to live and work in the Lansing vicinity, the Lansing region.
If I can comment too, as you heard in my opening remarks, I've served on a number of boards over my career here in Lansing, and what I've learned is that the first responsibility of a board member is to the survival and the flourishing of the organization that you're on the board for. And I don't have any, I'm not elected. I don't have constituents in the way that council people do. I don't run for office. And I agree with Dick that if people were on the board that were going to have to run for election down the road, it may cloud their judgment on what they would vote for. Is it really for the best, in the best interest of the company, or is it for their own political best interests? That's where I think a conflict would come in.
Thank you.
Commissioner Dow.
Thank you so much for the presentation. Excuse me. I want to talk a little bit about kind of auditing of policies that are currently on with the board. So we talk about rates, which are relevant, right? But I have used the term and probably have seen it through social media. I think some of the policies are predatory, especially when we're talking about security deposits for service, or security deposit is the right term, but a deposit for service. Myself included, I do auto pay, and my credit card renewed, and my payment was declined. And in order to continue my service, I had to pay a deposit. Now, I was able to fight that because it made no sense to me as a consumer who paid their bill every month. But I had the means to pay the deposit, but we have people in this community that would not have the means to pay that. We have people moving to the area who are trying to get utilities for the first time in their name that aren't able to turn them on. And we're talking about a median income that is lower than outside areas, right? And so if somebody shows up into our community that has never had a utility with us, and they have some sort of a credit situation or what have you, we are penalizing them by moving into the community. And right now, that's a huge detriment for folks moving to Lansing. So I'm curious how that policy is being reviewed and what's happening there, and especially in light of the fact that we just learned of a large chunk of deposits that were never returned to folks. So where's the checks and balances there? Because our job here is to make sure that what's in this charter is reflecting to the constituents, and we're handling their business efficiently. But I don't feel comfortable with that right now. I feel like that practice is very predatory.
We did a major rewrite of it here last year when we had concerns from customers, and we started refunding deposits sooner. We also, if you didn't have credit, that was kind of held against you. We no longer do that, and it continues to evolve. And we were balancing it on uncollected debt. Our uncollected debt compared to any utility was 2 to 3 times, and it was driving rate strategies to folks that were barely paying their bills. So we were trying to find that balancing act again. So we found that so far by refunding the deposits and not charging for folks that don't have credit, we're not seeing anything negative there. So we're walking down that path to see how much we can walk that back without driving up our uncollected debt and then negatively affecting folks that are barely able to pay their bills and pushed into that. And also now, since we've opted into PA 95, instead of having $400,000 out of our general fund available to help those folks, we have $1.5 million last year, so we can help them with those deposits and help them keep their energy on. So it's a step in the right direction, but I know we're not there yet. You're welcome. Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions? Okay, I have a couple. I just wanted to go over the materials that you presented us and the amendments that you were requesting to be made to the charter. First of all, I see, in section 5.201 for the general responsibility, I understand the addition of the chilled water language. But looking at thermal energy, it looks like it's going to be including hot water. Is there going to be a new service that's coming forward? Or?
Yes, there is. Steam is it's a dinosaur. It's on its way out. The law losses. I'm tired of the barrels around town. We're done with that. So right now, and as part of our sustainability and carbon neutrality, everything, we pump 2 million gallons of water a year, use it one time and put it down the sewer. It's just a total waste of a resource. So we are moving towards hot water. We have customers that want the hot water, that don't want steam, so it can turn into a utility that's got growth. But it's expensive, because right now, we have a steam line that goes out, they use the steam, it turns to water, it goes down the sewer system. We have to have 10 miles of line, we have to send out hot water, and then it comes back a little cooler than we sent it. So it's a closed loop, there's very little losses. That's how our chilled water system works. But we wanted to get that language added, because that's coming forward. We're working with a developer on these new big projects, are coming to town. They want hot water, but they don't want steam, and we understand that. So it's cheaper to make hot water than it is to make steam. You don't have to heat it up as much. So that's a new utility that we'd like entered into.
Okay, fair enough. I get the language request for the general manager versus director. The third one, dealing with the powers of the board and the audit that has to be done. Is the city including the Board of Water and Light in their audit?
No, they don't. The board does an audit, and then they, with financials, they send it to the city, they present to the city.
Okay.
But if it's if it's an audit driven by the commissioner's auditor, they assign 6 or 8 audits a year. Those are conducted, and then we have an external audit that's done by Baker Tilly, and that was just completed, and then that information can be shared.
Okay, in the past, did the city do the audit? As part
Not
of
in my
their
time. I don't ever remember them doing the audit.
Okay. The way I read the charter is they were supposed to be doing it.
That's why we looked at it, hasn't been being done that way.
Okay. On the withdrawal of funds, and I see your explanation here and the fact that this hasn't been done, at least as far as you know.
We went back as far as the record would go, and it's always been separate. We don't know why, if it ever changed or it was ever done, but since you're cleaning up language, we thought this was an opportune time to clean it up.
Okay. The one concern I would have is I think this was set up to have, some tie between the city and the board, at least on some of the financial stuff, and to provide some controls that would safeguard some of the expenditure of these funds. And by the way that you're proposing that this be done, it's basically turning everything back over to the board, which is apparently what you're currently doing. I am concerned that, as it's been my experience looking at this charter, there are a number of provisions. We talk about accountability and transparency and all that. There are a number of provisions in the charter that provide for that, but we're finding that they're not being implemented. And there's absolutely no consequences if they don't follow those charter provisions. And so it's kind of frustrating. And as we go forward, we want to make sure that we're putting in provisions that are going to be respected and followed, and that there will be consequences if they're not. That's not a threat or anything.
No,
but
we
it's-
have no
it's-
disagreement there until we
Yeah.
dug into it. We didn't know this wasn't
Yeah.
being done. It's just over time. I think the city started out, the board was a water utility only. Electric came in later. That's maybe when it was done, but we couldn't go back. But we understand your.
Did the council ever create an ordinance for the procedures for the disbursement of monies?
Mark is Mark Mattis, our legal counsel.
Good evening. The city attorney's office recently noted a ordinance that does exactly that, Chair. It's 248.01, which authorizes the general manager and the secretary of the board to issue checks from BWL accounts. So I think that the provision was addressed. I'm sorry, I didn't catch it when we submitted our letter, but the city attorney's office came across it last week and pointed it out to me. So I can supplement this.
Well,
so that
so
you can,
does that support the current method that you're following in terms of disbursement of funds?
exactly, yes, it does.
Okay. So it's consistent then?
It is the ordinance is consistent. It's a 1988 ordinance. I think it's still on the books, but
Okay, great. Thank you.
1988.
And then the collection and hearing procedure. I noticed that you put in your Rule 8 that mirrors, for the most part, I think at the end, at least under the current ordinance, the mayor was supposed to make some recommendations in part of that process, part of the hearing process. That's not in Rule 8. But speaking of these rules, are these rules of procedure and policies that you have? I couldn't find those.
Yes, these are part of our rules and regulations for each of the utilities, and this particular rule goes across all 4 utilities.
So do you have other rules that will address the specific charter provisions here in this?
No, that would be the rule.
That's the one?
And we wouldn't propose to vary much from the way the city ends up doing things. The city's procedure is a little bit more complicated, but I think this one is relatively robust as well, quite robust, and comports with the charter as it's written. So this amendment, by changing the language, I wouldn't think that we would need to propose any changes to our Rule 8, and we'd stay consistent with how the city does it if they amend theirs as well.
Okay, got it. So did you, when you put this together, has this been reviewed by council, or have you talked to council or the mayor about these proposed changes?
So I am the general counsel for the Board of Water and Light, and yes, we did present these to our counterparts in the city. The city attorney's office has seen our drafts as well.
Were there any objections?
No objections.
Okay. I wanted to talk, you gave us a copy of the Model City Charter. And in it, it talks about the use of utility funds. And you've mentioned that tonight. We used to call it the pilot, the payment in lieu of taxes. What are you calling it now?
Return on equity?
Return on equity. Okay. It's not, there's no language in the charter about that, and it's a significant issue, I would think, for the city. Would you recommend any language going into the charter about that?
That's a slippery slope. Mark, do you want to talk about that? I know it, but there's some issues that we can talk to you about there.
So that I think that is, it's probably not something that needs to be in the city charter. It's not. We've been doing it for years. It is one of those things that can lead to litigation. Exactly. And so we wouldn't recommend it. We use this. It makes sense that as the owner of this asset, the Lansing Board of Water and Light, that the city deserves a return on that investment. But nonetheless, there are sometimes predatory, maybe is the word, litigators out there that pursue issues like these as a equity to other.
Attorneys are not predators. I just want you to know that.
When the agreement expires, they're usually 2-year agreements. The mayor will assign a representative, and we'll work with our finance folks. And then once a number is agreed on, then it comes to council to see if they agree with that number. So it's that's how it works right now.
Okay. In terms of fire hydrants, not the maintenance or repair, but the water, the use of water through fire hydrants, and then street lights, the electricity for that.
Mm-hmm.
How is that divided up between the board and the city?
The street lights is a cost of service. So each municipality dictates the level of service they want. Like if you want somebody patrolling it, or you can lower your rates just having the customers call them in. So on street lights they take, and as we install the street lights, there's and evaluate what the cost is, and there's no markup on it. So every couple years we take and say, okay, the cost to have the 30,000 streetlights is X amount, and it's so much for this type of standard or that. And the city's gone down to like 2 or 3 different standards that keep the rates down, and it's based on the depreciation and the maintenance cycle, and then a monthly rate comes up with that, and that's what's billed for the city.
What about the water?
Fire hydrants is baked into, I'm
It was
not
my
sure, because
understanding.
that changed a few years back. I can't remember how the fire hydrants are done right now. I'd have to follow up, because it used to be that we charged the city for that, but I think it's a tax now, but we will confirm with you on that.
Okay.
I think it's on each individual bill in the city, that each resident is billed for it, but we can get that information very quick for you.
Okay, thank you.
But streetlights are different, and each municipality, East Lansing or Delta, have their own agreement set up, and it's just based on the cost to keep them up. If you want an extra streetlight, here it is, and then as they depreciate off, we take and say, all right, here was the cost to run it, and that's how the monthly fee is decided per light.
Okay. One last thing. Linda Appling is a person who lives in the city of Lansing. She's been down before us on a number of times talking about the Board of Water and Light. One thing she wants to do is invest in the Board of Water and Light. She would like to buy some of the bonds that you folks are sending or
yes.
selling. So what is the process? Is there a policy or procedure that you have in place that would deal with that, where members of the public could come in and buy some?
Absolutely, and I'm going to stay away from how we advertise it right now, but we...
I couldn't find anything, so I was
when
looking.
we issue bonds, or when we go out for bonds, the day before, prior, we allow smaller denominations to be bought by anybody, residents, anybody that wants to do that, and before they go to the market, because they get sold immediately. But yeah, they're allowed. They can do that. I purchased bonds once when we did chilled water 20 years ago, and we did this $325 million debt issuance. They could buy bonds, and typically we make sure there's a denomination that an individual that wants to buy can do that. I don't know what they were last time, but they're not like $10,000 issuance.
How would they go about it? If she wanted to buy some, how would she go about it?
We can, well, right now, until we issue debt again, but we can push a procedure out, and if we can actually email her and say, here's how you buy a Board of Water and Light bond the next time, and we'd be happy to send that to her. We don't have any debt issuance in the near future, thankfully.
So, I mean, are you keeping a list if she would call and say, I'm interested in this? Do you have a list that you maintain, so next time it comes up, you automatically send it or something?
I don't think, we don't have a current list, but figuring something out like that's a pretty easy lift for us. If folks want to buy the bonds, we can say we have a list of interested parties, and if they're still interested, we issue debt. I have no problems putting something like that together.
Okay.
Very
Right.
easy to do it. But we will I'll have them get this contact information for this customer and reach out to them and say, here's the way that we do it. Because each issuance is a little different, but at least they know the timing, and they know the cost, and they know when they can do it. So,
Okay.
Very easy request.
All right, appreciate it. I have no further questions. Anybody else? Commissioner Washington.
I just have a question on the return on equity. I understand it can be a slippery slope if we put it in the charter for the litigious folks. Not that anybody is. But you said that like every 2 years, the Board of Water and Light and the mayor make an agreement. Is this like just a handshake agreement?
No,
Is
no,
this
it's in
codified
writing.
somewhere where this is what's gonna happen every 2 years?
It's very formal because, and the agreement could go 4 years or 5 years. It could, whatever term that both parties are comfortable with, and knowing that the city does own the board, but we do negotiate hard for the customers too. So once a proposal's been submitted from the mayor's office to my administration, we look at it, and there's some haggling that goes back and forth. Then we take it to our board of commissioners, and then it goes to the city, and it's adopted in resolutions, and it's a formalized agreement.
And it becomes part of the city budget.
Yes.
Okay, so, but what you're telling me is there's not a specified time or period of time. It just happens like if you and Mayor Shore got together, you made an agreement for 3 years, and then that's how we go. But another time it might be 2 years. I guess this is what I want. Is there anything specific in?
Well, it's negotiated as part of the city, of the mayor's budget presentation. It's negotiated as part of the mayor's budget presentation to city council. And so if it's a 2-year negotiation, that's something that is to the benefit of both the city and the BWL in saying, well, we're going to go out 2 years, and you can count on that next year, and that's a done deal. You're welcome.
Any other questions? Gentlemen, thank you for coming down. Thank the employees and the staff that's here tonight as well. Appreciate your interest. You're supposed to be 20 minutes, Dick, and it's been about almost an hour and a half. Yeah, okay. Thank you. All right, under old business. City council structure. We have our attorney, Ms. Rewa, here with us tonight. She's in person instead of by Zoom. And we have a legal opinion. There was a request that the conflict of interest opinion be drawn up regarding some conversations that happened at our last meeting. There is an opinion. It's not been handed out yet because of attorney-client privilege. In order for us, we have two options, as I understand it. In fact, Kristen, why don't I turn it over to you?
Thank you, Chair. As indicated, there was an issue raised at the last meeting about a potential conflict and a request in the open meeting from a couple board members requesting an attorney opinion. So I did prepare one. It is a situation where it's an application of facts to law, so the attorney-client privilege can apply, but that's not my decision to make. That's the board's decision to make. As an attorney, I have to protect it unless and until you tell me otherwise. Your options are, there is a specific provision of the Open Meetings Act that does allow a board to consider a written legal opinion by an attorney in closed session if you wish to do that. So you can recess, go in to a closed session, consider it, come back out and move with your business. You can also, to the extent I am directed, to the extent that there is no motion to go into closed session, or you otherwise direct me to plow forward and you review this in an open meeting, you ask me to discuss it in an open meeting, that document, the privilege will have been waived by that sort of non-decision. A non-decision is a decision. And so that would then be, would be discussed in the open. Again, it's up to you to make that decision, and I'm looking for direction on how you want to handle that.
So, Vice Chair Snyder?
I was going to move to have this, your legal opinion discussed in open.
In an open.
Well, we don't need a motion for that. If we want to do that,
She
if
was
there.
looking for direction.
You don't have to give me a motion to that extent, but to the extent you can make a motion too, that's fine.
Why don't we just do it?
Okay.
If there's no objection, we'll just proceed in open meeting with it. I hear, any objection? Hearing none? Yeah.
Well, in lack of, just for clarification, there are two other opinions that regarding drafting of language, but this is another opinion that. Oh, okay, excellent, perfect. Okay.
Go ahead.
So, all right, the question was whether there is a conflict of interest for particularly two members of this commission to consider matters that may affect how the provisions of the charter apply to the city council members, given that there are two board members here that have children that are current sitting City of Lansing council members. First, we have to decide who decides this question. And upon review of both the Home Rule Cities Act and the charter and the City of Lansing ethics opinion, it is our opinion that it is this commission's decision to decide whether a conflict of interest applies. Because the Home Rule Cities Act states that this commission is the sole judge, that's the language used in the statute, for the qualifications of the board members as well as the proceedings or the manner in which you proceed in meetings, and so conflict issues would apply under there. So it's your decision to apply. That being said, when reviewing this, I did also look at the City of Lansing charter provisions regarding ethics and the ethics ordinance as guidance, but understanding that unless and until this board decides that those ordinances apply, because you're sort of created and governed by state law, we're really looking at that. And to that end, there are a few state laws that govern ethics, but none of them really apply to this situation. In particular, the main state law that applies to local boards and public bodies really only applies to contracts, which we don't have here. So then we next look at, well, okay, is there a conflict of interest? Based on review of language that often applies and is reviewed in terms of whether a local board whether a local board member has a conflict of interest, it was our determination that there was not. And in particular, and this may sound odd, but this commission does not make a final decision. Even though you're doing a very important job, at the end of the day, you are making a recommendation to the electorate, and it's the voters that will decide. And it's think of that as a break in the causal chain. So you can make the recommendation, but it's ultimately the electors that are going to decide. So that's their decision, and that kind of alleviates any concerns on that regard. The other important thing to note is that typically when we were looking at whether conflict of interest apply, you were looking at whether there is a financial or personal interest involved. In this case, when we were looking at application of what the charter provisions apply, these are not financial or personal interests of the people currently occupying the chairs. It is looking at what is happening with that seat, not necessarily the person in the seat. And because of that, it is our conclusion and legal opinion that also means that there is no financial or personal interest involved. And we also, again, we looked at guidance as to what the City of Lansing Ethics Ordinance does state. And in terms of, the only thing that would really come close to it is a provision that states that no officer shall participate in, vote upon, or act upon contracts, makings of loans, and then it says, or other regulation or supervision relating to any business in which the officer or employee or a member of his or her immediate family or any business of which is either associated or has a financial or personal interest other than an interest as a citizen, officer, or employee of the city. So really this interest is this, holding that seat and holding that position. And there's case law that does state that is not a vested personal interest of the person holding the seat, nor is there a vested personal interest in a continuation of the terms as they currently exist or how the wards are drawn as they currently exist. So based on that sort of review of the law, it is our opinion that there is no conflict of interest for this determination.
Any questions? All right. Commissioner Washington.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And I'm sorry it even came to this. To me, it was pretty clear. There was no conflict of interest. Commissioner Lopez and I were elected to these seats, as were our children. And everybody knew our children were council members. So, but I do appreciate this so that this can be cleared up.
Any other comments? Commissioner Lopez.
Yeah, well, thank you again for the opinion. I mean, to me, if we were not going to be able to vote on one thing, we can vote on anything. So, then what would be the object of being elected? But anyway, thank you for your work and clarification.
Vice Chair.
I saw no conflict, but I'm glad that it was brought up and that you clarified, so for public's sake, they understand why we came to the decision that we came to and why we're doing it. So transparency is best. Thank you.
And if I can add too, don't necessarily take it, and I don't know that anyone is, but to the extent that that's out there, don't take it as a personal affront. A lot of times, judges, for example, if there's an appearance of impropriety, air it out and have the decision and let it all go and then move forward. So, that's kind of how the sausage is made. So.
Other comments, questions? Hearing none, we'll move on to the city council structure discussion. Is there any discussion? Commissioner Washington.
I don't mind discussion, but I'm certainly not ready to vote on this.
Oh, is there any discussion? She appreciates the discussion, but she's not ready to vote on it. Yeah. Vice Chair.
For purpose of discussion, I would move to amend the charter to adopt a new council structure of 4 wards and 3 at-large seats. Sorry.
Okay, there's a motion. Is there any discussion on that motion? Is there support? There's support. It's been moved and supported. Is Is there any discussion on the motion? Commissioner Anderson.
Well, first, I would like to thank the people who came and spoke today and did public comment specifically about this. I think that there is a lot of validity in expanding the number of wards to ensure that there is more representation. And I think Keith mentioning, a higher diversity of perspectives, right? And I know there was a conversation point last meeting about, our at-large council members are the most diverse on council. But I would encourage us to look beyond just, racial diversity and look at socioeconomics, varying levels of abilities, et cetera, et cetera. And I would also say that this is the first time I've ever seen at-large as diverse as it is, and that's not a guarantee going forward. I would say most of the time that I've ever paid attention to local government, most at-large council members lived in the same neighborhood, had similar socioeconomic status, similar races, similar genders, et cetera. And so I would encourage us to look beyond that. And I would also say too, I mentioned this last meeting, but I don't think that reducing or getting rid of at-large seats means that people have less representation. Again, just because you're an elected for a ward doesn't mean that you only care about your ward. You still care about the city as a whole. But it just allows you to have more direct connection to your constituent base, so.
Other comments? Commissioner Washington.
Thank you. And I'm going to say this again. I served on council when half of the council was from the same ward. Their ward person and 3 at-large people, plus the mayor, plus the city clerk, and that's the danger. And as far as, I know we had a person say that the at-large seats have diversity. The reality doesn't support that narrative. Every person on council is from a protected group right now. So that just doesn't even wash. All of the ward members are, and all of the at-large. And I will still fight that people in lower socioeconomic groups are only going to get proper representation from their people that understand their way of life. And, and it's not, as Commissioner Anderson said, it's not just about race. It's about age. It's about diversity of thought, diversity of experience. We need the middle class. We need the higher class, where I've been on council when most of the representatives have been from the Morris River Drive area, and they need representation too. So I'm just saying, these at-large seats, you cannot guarantee diversity. I served when there were 7 women and 1 man. It's always a mix-up. And the at-large seats don't make sense for true representation of people that aren't getting true representation. And I would just say that, again, I'm going to talk about the money. It is cost prohibitive for somebody in the public housing units to run for office. They will never be able to run to represent their neighborhoods. It is no slam against anybody that ever ran for office and got at large. We're not doing this charter for days gone by. We're doing this charter for 5 years, 10 years, maybe 20. And if we continue the way we're continuing, we are not going to be sitting at 112,000 people. The hope is the city will grow. And with that, we are bringing in a lot of lower income people that deserve proper representation from their people. And I have had a lot of conversations with people. I'm everywhere. Commissioner Anderson is everywhere. And frankly, the idea of these at-large seats are not washing. It may have been good for days gone by, but those days are gone. So I think it's time to think progressively, to think about true representation. We have a more diverse population. We have a poorer population. and we have people that deserve representation from their own people. And I don't think lessening the amount of council members is the answer. I truly believe expanding the wards and having board members only.
Councilmember Lopez. Or, pardon me, Commissioner.
Thank you. I would like to really have a conversation about the various proposals, because if we make this decision right now, we really haven't looked at what others and what would be the potential, for example, of 1% today. I myself had thought about districts, larger districts than wards, and a combination of. This is kind of like that. But I think we owe the community a conversation of each of their proposals and then come to a decision, whatever that is. But at least we've taken the community's thought and advice and proposal to heart. Whether at the end of the day we don't agree with it, well, that's another story. But at least we paid attention and moved on those things, looked at the pros and cons, and then came to a decision. It may still be the same decision, I don't know, but at least we looked at their recommendations, because they elected us to do that. So I would hope that we kind of take a step back and look at the various proposals and look at what makes sense, what doesn't. Is there a charter or a rule and regulation that doesn't allow that? Whatever it is. But my main point is that we should give each recommendation its due review.
Commissioner
Campbell. I think that we should maybe table this and have further discussion. But one of the things I want to point out too, again, this is my personal thing as far as us expanding, the population of Lansing is not expanding. It has been, we want it to, and that's the objective that we'd like to get to, but I would hate for us to expand it and we don't move that way for another 15, 20 years. So I do believe it should be an odd number, whatever we come up with, instead of that even.
Yeah.
So that takes it out, but and I'm not gonna go the at-large or ward type thing, but I feel that we could probably maybe put in a provision if the city of Lansing gets to 150,000, citizen-wise, then it triggers to add more council members, maybe do a provision like that. But as far as us expanding it to 9 right now, I don't see that. I don't agree with that.
Other comments? Commissioner Bauer.
I support everyone who has said that we should not be voting on this tonight. This issue, I think we all realized when we were in the community listening, in our listening sessions when we ran for office, the strong mayor issue, but this was even more important to the people that I think of that have concerns, have input, is the representation of the council, the number, but more than that, the ward at large. So I would hope that, we might say we have 3 weeks before we will be addressing it or something like that, so that the public knows that this is before us, that we are going to be talking about it during our meetings. And if they want their feelings heard, which I hope people come forward and let us know, that they come down, they send letters. I just would hate to make any decisions quickly, even though we've been talking about it. I think the public does not realize that part. I mean, they're not watching this every night. So feel really strongly that we need to get that word out, that this is a topic is going to be addressed soon.
Commissioner Vice Chair Snyder.
Yes, and I agree with what everyone is saying about this. And I know that the public, they have come down, they've spoken on it time and time again. We've had public meetings and they've come forth, and we appreciate those comments. I think just like we did with the strong mayor versus the city manager, getting that solid research. We've all done our own research, of course, and have our own opinion, but just to get that outside opinion and understand what would it look like if we expanded the ward? What would it look like if we, and look at the numbers and how the districts shape up and the representation of those districts. So I think that's very important, because my concern is, I think, and I can be corrected, right now, there are 3 people on council that are from the 3rd ward, to my knowledge, and I could be wrong, but I know, or more. So just to look at that, they'll really have representation of the entire city, but I would like that information first. I've done my own research, but, you know, and I've listened to the public, but I don't want a situation where someone comes back and says, well, you didn't listen to the public. You know what I mean? And I don't think there's any more we can do as far as the public has sent in information. They've come to our meetings. They've come to our community members. So we've heard them, you know what I mean? And we want to use their input, but it's more important to get some solid data and numbers regarding our city and what our future looks like. Thank you.
Is there a motion to table?
Well, there's a motion on the floor, so you have to vote it down.
I'm sorry.
There's,
Commissioner Washington?
Just really quickly, I don't think this is as critical as deciding on strong mayor and city manager. At the end of the day, we are going to have a council. It's just, what does that look like? With the mayor, it was, are we going to have a strong mayor, or are we going to have a city manager, which would change everything. So council, I mean, I don't think it's something that we have to do immediately.
Commissioner Cowie? We can make a motion.
My question was take a motion to table.
Okay.
you can't, there's a motion on the floor, so there has to be voted down.
You can.
You said you can,
Table.
there was a motion on the table, so you have to vote it up or down.
No. You table.
It stops.
Oh,
it.
Yes.
okay,
Suspends it.
okay.
Okay, there's a motion before us to table. You can second it. Okay, we got first and second. All right. All in favor, say aye. Those opposed, nay. It passes.
Mr. Chair,
Oh, Commissioner Lopez.
yeah, I want to make a recommendation that the proposals for council structure be brought to the next meeting, and so that we can see each of the proposals and have some conversation on them as we discuss the form of council structure.
So,
Yeah, we've had a proposal for all wards,
yeah,
no at large.
I mean, why don't we do it this way? Why don't we just say, if there's any commissioner who has an idea of what they want in terms of this council structure, put something together, get it to Emery by Thursday before the next meeting. It'll become part of the packet, and then we will discuss those proposals at the next meeting. Is that right?
All right.
Okay. All right. Okay, going on to new business. You have in your packet the proposed meeting schedule beginning next year. It's the same schedule that we maintain now. It's every other Tuesday. It starts on January 7th, and it goes all the way through the end of June. And if we need to, depending on if we ever get into the charter, how long that's going to take, we can do additional meetings. But really would like to shoot for that. June 24th is the date that we've completed our work. Is there anybody have any questions, or is there any concerns about this meeting schedule?
Or does it mean we're not meeting on the January 21st, then on the holidays? Or
That's Monday. We're meeting Tuesday. Right?
I thought these were on Tuesdays.
Yeah, it's just in relation, it's the day after the holiday. Commissioner Anderson.
I think my concern is, I don't think that we'll, based off of what we've done so far, get through the whole charter in 13 meetings. I don't see that as a reality, how we've been moving.
Yeah, good point, and you may be right. What I was going to do is, starting at our next meeting, we're going to get into the actual review, the line item review of each article. The first article and maybe the second article will not really be dependent upon what the decision is as to the council structure makeup. So I think we can start that, and let's see how that goes. I think everybody has to be prepared at our next meeting to go line by line through that, and we'll get with our attorney, figure out if there are any issues there or any things that we should be looking at, and let's see how it goes. And if need be, we can amend it or adjust it. I think everybody wants to get it done. All right. Any other comments or questions? Motion be in order to approve the schedule. It's been moved. Is there support? Then moved and supported. Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those nay. It does pass unanimously. Okay, the next item, we've had two issues that we've had a lot of discussion on to date. One is the non-discrimination and civil rights provision of the charter. We all agree that it's severely lacking in what we have today from what was included 45 years ago. And then we also talked about the ineligibility of officer for office based on the felony conviction and what the Michigan Constitution currently provides. So item B is the Article 1-302, the non-discrimination and civil rights provision. We've asked Ms. Rewa to put together an opinion or overview, and with some recommendations, she has done that. So, Kristen, I'll turn it over to you at this point if you want to review that.
Thank you. So there is a legal letter opinion with the language and some of the law that may pertain to this. And there has been some direction, and it seems at least the direction that the commission is going is I believe there would like to be some revised language to section 1-302, but I need further guidance in terms of what the scope of that is. And I think some of the discussion that's been had in the past is sort of what the statement is on the characteristics that are listed in the current language, which is outdated and incomplete as it pertains to what current civil rights laws state, as outlined in my letter here. But it's not just sort of what's listed as the characteristics, but also what is the scope in terms of how you think that this should be drafted. As it currently stands, when we look at that, it says, in the exercise of its powers or in the performance of its duties, the city and all its agencies shall ensure. So the scope of this provision as it currently exists is really limited to what we would call public service discrimination type laws and ensuring against public service discrimination as the city delivers its services. But when we look at civil rights laws in general and anti-discrimination laws in general, there tends to be various buckets that the laws apply to. So you've got employment, public services, public accommodations, housing, education, and there might even be a few more that I have missed in giving this. But it's broad, and so it's some discussion I think needs to be had, some direction, at least for me, is do you want to, what is the scope of the revision that you are envisioning putting into this? Is it simply kind of just updating the list of characteristics, or is it something more broad? And so to that end, I did provide a couple ideas, at least to get this started, and again, there has to be discussion on, these are not the only options. But to the extent you are looking at this as simply being a cleanup and modernization, we did put in some proposed language to add some of the more recent terminology. So instead of handicap, we have disability, because that is what the current language in federal and state laws provide. But then also adding to the characteristic language all characteristics which apply to public services, which would include the city, as defined in state law. So we would have there, I did not delete any characteristic. We recommended changing disability or handicap to disability, but we did not delete any word. So the recommended for an option one for a more modest proposal would be to have the list of characteristics be race, religion, creed, political orientation, color, national origin, marital status, sex, sexual orientation, which would be new. Religion, actually, the word religion wasn't stated in there originally. It was just creed, so we put religion in. But sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, age, disability, and then there is a specific law applying to public services for breastfeeding a child or expressing human milk. The other thing that you may wish to consider as well is this is an area of law that constantly evolves, and so perhaps adding some language to allow for this to encompass any additional characteristics that are determined as the law evolved to be something that needs to be protected, so that as this continues forward, you're sort of incorporating what an ordinance may provide or what state law or what federal law may provide. And so that's something to look at there. And if you and then the other option too is if you're looking at something more broad in terms of a policy statement on sort of anti-discrimination in general, what we did was we looked to the Human Rights Ordinance, which is I think the most recent I guess at least legislative policy statement of the city of Lansing, and what it states as the general, these are the characteristics that are needing to be protected, and this is all forms of discrimination adversely affect citizens of Lansing. So putting that language in, and at least having you look at that and looking at is it something more broad that is perhaps something you'd like to do. But while doing this, again, keeping in mind a couple things you may want to consider keeping is some statement on providing for equal protection of the laws. So when we're talking about anti-discrimination, it's not just looking at characteristics, but also respecting the fundamental, people engaging in their fundamental rights, so freedom of speech, things like that, which is protected in both option 1 and option 2, but then also, again, putting that sort of cleanup proviso of or other characteristic as defined by law to allow for this to continue to expand. Remember, the charter, like the Constitution, sets a floor, not a ceiling. So, you are setting the floor of this is the base sort of area that we think is important that should guide sort of city policy, city ordinance, but then also allowing it to expand as the years and the decades go on. Do you have any questions?
Other questions? Commissioner Dow.
Thank you for this. This is great. Between the option 1 and option 2, I mean, in my mind, I think it is pretty great that our city has a human rights ordinance like that. It's robust, and it seems to me that would be the no-brainer option to put that as the floor, as you said, right? And then you're proposing the language that would say, allow this to adopt as we move forward without having to make changes in language, right? So it would include any additional protections identified by law. Is that the?
Yeah, so under option 2, the language would be or other characteristic as defined by law. And if you look up in option 1, I mean, you could also say or other characteristic as defined by law or ordinance, but allowing that additional sort of statement in there to understanding that this continues to evolve.
Other Commissioner Cowan.
I just had a question because there is a couple. I had one, again, studying this myself, that I would like to add. And there's a couple of things that weren't on here. Can we send those to you, or maybe I can send it to everyone to maybe look at?
Sure. If you want to send it to me, I'll get it to Emery. We can get it distributed out, and then we'll get it to her.
Okay.
You want to discuss it?
Well, one of the things, like with the one that I had here had, and again, I guess it depends how you break it down, but I can just read it. In accordance to applicable laws, there shall be no discrimination against any employee with respect to compensation, terms, conditions, privilege, or opportunities for employment because of race, color, religion, sex, including pregnancy, gender, gender identity, gender expression, veteran status, medical condition, and has including genetic characteristics, sexual orientation, age, national origin, disabilities as defined in the Americans with Disabilities Act, linguistic characteristics such as accent or limited English proficiency were not substantially job-related, marital status, or any other basis prohibited by law.
Why don't you send that to us? And then we'll get them passed around.
All right.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, so what we're going to do, where we go from here, we're going to get that additional information. We're going to address Ben's concern, make sure that's taken care of, and then you'll bring back to us final language that we can then deal with at our next meeting, correct?
Yep.
Okay. All right. Let's go to Article 2-103, and eligibility for office. Kristen also has another letter for us.
So, yep, again, there's another kind of opinion laying out the current provision in the city charter regarding felonies, and then looking at some of the law as it pertains to this. There had been some suggestion in one of the prior meetings, and it was a public comment, that there is a preemption issue here, and that you have to apply and use only the language that's in the Constitution as it pertains to the felony ineligibility. Preemption is going to be an issue that you need to know about because some of that will apply in provisions that we discuss later, but this is not one of them. In particular, because if you look at the language of the Constitution, it states that those provisions are in addition to anything else. So this is a situation where the current provision of the charter is not preempted by what is in the state constitution. Preemption, generally speaking, and it can get a little more complicated, but for purposes of this discussion, preemption means that a local law cannot allow what is prohibited by state law and cannot prohibit what is it's in there. Cannot prohibit what state law allows and cannot allow what state law prohibits. And in this case, the state constitution provides that these things, again, are the floor. So this is the base, that you cannot allow this to be an individual in a public office, in a local elected office, cannot have these particular instances of a type of felony as provided in the Constitution. But there is a specific provision in the Constitution that says, but you can have additional regulations and qualifications on that. So you can go above it if you want, but you don't have to. So to the extent that you want to just adopt or leave it at what the state constitution provides, there are a few options. You can simply just strike the felony provision, and then it's just the state constitution is going to apply. Or you can just modify the language that's currently in the charter to reflect what is in the state constitution. There's one thing that's sort of nice about striking, either totally striking or at least adopting what's in the state law, is that also allows the benefit of having clearly have case law that interprets the state constitution also applied to provisions here. So there's really not a whole lot of case law, like no one, there are very few lawsuits that have arisen about challenging provisions of a particular candidate's eligibility for office and whether this constitutional provision applies. There is one sort of, I'd say, potential weakness that had been discovered to the extent that you consider it a weakness, in that when you are interpreting the application of the constitutional prohibition, it does not apply to felony conduct conducted while in office of a tribal nation or a federally recognized tribal nation. That's really the only, I think, limitation that has been sort of defined in interpreting the statute. So, or in interpreting the Constitution provision on this. So to the extent you wanted to add that, that's certainly a possibility. But we did have some proposed language that would essentially just adopt the constitutional provision exactly kind of as it would apply to the city of Lansing. So if there's any questions on that, I'm happy to entertain
Questions? Chris and I had one. I was trying to understand the relationship between Article 5, 103, appointment of board members, as it relates to the elective office in 2-103. It was my understanding, the way I read it, 5-103 pertains just to board members, board and commission members. And the limitation for appointment to those boards and commissions, there's no prohibition against a felony conviction.
Correct, you are correct. So, and that was something I thought was important to point out. So currently, the provision we're looking at is 2-103, an ineligibility for office, and then it says any person who has been convicted of these things shall not be eligible to hold any city office. So then it's, what does city office mean? That is not defined, but officer is. And so the way officer is defined, and keep this in mind when you're, looking at things next week or next meeting, officer includes elected officials of the city, which does include members of the boards and commissions, their executive staffs, all head of departments and divisions. But that's why we have to keep reading and look at the charter as a whole. When we get to section 5-103 on appointment of board members, there is a specific carve out that as it currently pertains to boards and commissions on the city of Lansing, the felony prohibition does not apply to those appointed boards. It's just the elected officials, and then the executive staffs of members of boards and commissions, and also heads of departments and divisions.
Okay, so would it make sense to amend both provisions then to include the Constitution language, Michigan Constitution?
So I don't know that you necessarily need to do that, and a part of this too is, is that something that we address when we get to sort of that? If we're doing a line by line review, that's certainly something we can look at when we get down to that point. But the other thing to keep in mind is if you're adopting the Michigan constitutional provision, it only applies to local elected officials. So it wouldn't apply to any appointed boards, and it wouldn't apply to all employees. It would only apply to the specific identified employees listed in the Constitution. And I'm always going to put an asterisk when we're talking about employees, because there's a whole lot of preemption stuff that's going to come up that we'll discuss in more detail later about employee rights, collective bargaining, and para. But I don't think that those would apply in this situation, given the high level of employee that the Michigan constitutional provision applies to. So I think if you adopt this, I don't think you necessarily are you don't need to preserve it, but that should be a cleanup later on.
Well, I was just thinking it would make more sense to have both provisions the same. I mean, that, if you're running for office or you want an appointment, it's the same criteria.
Okay, so that, which would be broader than what the Michigan Constitution currently requires, in terms of scope of who it applies to.
Yeah.
If that makes sense, so,
Yeah.
yeah.
And Chris just pointed out that particular language in 5103 was actually an amendment that passed through city vote back in 2022. So we should keep that in mind as we look at it. Go ahead. The 5-103 that took away the felony issue for board appointments, board and commission appointments, that was taken out by the voters. So, any other questions? So, in terms of where we are on this, Kristen, what are you looking from us?
So I suppose if there's, if the board wants me to come back with or the commission wants me to come back with language that would include, if you are looking to include the application of this limitation or this definition of the 20-year felonies to also apply to board, to the appointed boards and commissions, then I guess let me know that, and then I can look at how to draft that.
Commissioner Conway.
So I think we were probably looking at the opposite, about maybe removing that. So removing that since it's not on the other one. So remove that 20-year felony part in the appointed.
Well, yeah, I think what the conversation has been with the public is that they're pointing out the constitutional language, which includes the 20-year felony, but for very limited acts, that if you commit, dishonesty,
So to move it. under the
Dishonesty,
fraud,
deceit,
deceit.
fraud,
It's the
yeah.
fraud, deceit part.
And if, like you stated earlier, if we strike it totally, then it would default to the state constitution.
It would default to the state constitution, which, so just so we understand, it's who this applies to. So the state constitutional language applies to, for local governments, it would be a local elected official, so anyone that would be subject to election. And it's a felony that specifically is a felony, it falls within this deceit, blah, blah, blah. And the facts are such that the deceit happened within the scope of your employment of a public office. So as defined by the Constitution. So what happened in the one case that I mentioned here in this, let me find this case. There was a provision, this Paquin case. There was an individual who was a police chief and on the board of directors of a tribal organization that was convicted of a felony for doing some shady things with some federal funds. Later on, he goes to be a candidate for a local office for a city. It was originally he was denied being a candidate for that city, and he fought it, and it went up to the courts, and the court said, no, actually, the plain and unambiguous language of how the constitutional provision applies, it did not apply to him, because even though it's a felony, the way that the law was interpreted is the public office that had the felony had to be committed specifically within the scope of engaging in duties of a public office, which was defined as a local, state, or federal government, and a tribal agency does not fall within that. So, for example, if you had a candidate that was convicted of a felony for embezzling for a local nonprofit, and it was 2 years ago, the state constitution does not prohibit that person from running, because that, even though it's a felony, even though it's embezzlement like deceit and fraud, because that activity was not done within the scope of being a public official, that person can still be eligible to run. So, again, that's what you have to kind of look at is who is this applying to within the structure of city government, and what types of laws and conditions of the laws are you looking to have this apply to? Yep.
Okay, how does everyone want to move on this? Do you want to think about it? We want to get.
I would like to see the language actually written in the charter spelled out and just be aligned with whatever the state constitution is, personally.
So you're talking about that language?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you want to move that?
Oh, sure.
Okay, all right. That's something. Hurry up, let's vote before it changes.
Right.
It's been moved, do we have support?
Second.
It's been moved and supported. Any discussion on the language? So we are going to use the constitutional language and use that to replace the language in section 2-103.1. Okay, all those in favor? Wait.
Can I ask for clarification, just so we're clear, because the exact language of the state constitution is a little different than what we prepared, are you talking specifically about option 2 in the language here?
Yes.
Okay.
Is everybody on board with that? Okay.
Yep.
All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. It passes unanimously. Wow, we got it done. Public comment.
Okay, we are back to public comment. We have Randy Dykeheis, followed by Loretta Stanaway.
Okay. I know you guys are tired. You've been here a long time. I'll try and make this quick. So you heard the presentation from BWL tonight. They were very good. It was mostly about management. There wasn't much about charter-related issues, which I think are related to governance of BWL. And thank you for your questions, because I think they were really good questions, and they helped focus the discussion more on governance. So the question that I think you need to be asking yourselves is, how do we make the BWL Board of Commissioners more of a governing board rather than a rubber stamp for management? As much as individual board members will talk about how they have robust discussions and ask penetrating questions of management, I would ask you to go to a few of their meetings and find out that that just doesn't happen. It didn't, David Price talked about the strategic plan, which was approved, or which will be approved at their meeting next week, Tuesday. It was on the committee of the whole agenda last week, Thursday. There were virtually no questions about it. And I only bring that up, not because I think the strategic plan is particularly important, but because he cited it as a point of where he said we had a lot of discussion about it. Well, there wasn't much. Same thing happens when they talk about the annual budget, which I think there ought to be a lot of discussion about that. When management comes and says, here's what we're planning to spend for this year, and oh, by the way, there's going to be an 8% increase, or 7% increase on electricity, 9.5% increase on water, there weren't many questions at all. And so the question is, how do you change the culture of the board, the structure of the board, to make sure that they have that kind of robust discussion? And I'm not smart enough really to figure out what the answer is to that. I've got some ideas of ways that you can look at it. I think there's a lot of ways that you can do that. But that's the fundamental question I'd like you all to get to when you consider the BWL question as it pertains to the charter. A couple of other things. He talked about, I think it was Mr. Peffley talked about 6 months lead time for the rate increase. That's not really true either. The first time I heard it come up was at the Finance Committee meeting where they talked about the budget. And they said, oh, there's going to be a rate increase come, and there'll be a public hearing in August. That was in May. And then the charter said you have to have a 45-day notification prior to the public hearing. And they did that. They do that. They follow the law. They're responsible in that regard. But there was in no way, shape, or form a 6-month window that people had a chance to talk about and hear about and discuss the fact that this rate increase was coming. If you want to put that in the charter, I'd be all in support of that. That'd be a really great thing to have that kind of lead time for issues like the rate increase. Thanks.
Thank you. Next is Loretta Stanaway, and then Frederick McLaughlin.
Okay, briefly on the seats and so forth for the city council, I would suggest you seriously look at the idea of splitting the wards into 5 equal wards of about 22,400 persons per ward and have 2 at-large seats. And going back to Guillermo Lopez's point, I think it would be a wise thing for you folks if you made a list of every different suggestion people have brought to you here or in other sessions of the public, and then listed those in your agenda for next time around with your pros and cons discussions of each of those different suggestions. And then you can make an informed decision as to what thing seems best suited to represent the public the best and to get the most opportunities for the most people to run in a manner that they can afford to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Frederick McLaughlin, followed by Nicholas Pigeon.
Okay, I just wanted to expand on what I was mentioning about Mr. Shoup's book, The High Cost of Free Parking. Honestly, because as a full-time bicycle commuter, I don't pay a lot of attention to how much is free parking, but I think there's quite a bit around Lansing. In any case, Mr. Shoup is the former UCLA Planning Department chair, or dean of the department, whatever title they use out there. And his book was published by the American Planning Association, who are the issuers of AICP, which is the American Institute of Certified Planners. So it's a pretty well-respected document. Throughout California, there are many examples of this happening right now. One thing to think about also is if you do away with free parking, and if you open up residential areas to not necessarily have, that's to say not necessarily have single-family residences, then what you'll do, and if you do away with the requirement for parking, then people like myself who are full-time bicycle commuters, or I know many people my age who are full-time bicycle commuters. They'll be able to afford to build their residences. So that adds to the affordability aspect of building residences without relying on public sources. Also, it will create more development projects. You'll get duplexes, fourplexes, as I was mentioning before, and so there'll be more development projects to be done. And the developers can plan their own parking. And I say that not tongue-in-cheek, I mean that seriously. They have an investment at stake. So they're going to do it well, because otherwise their project will fail. So there's no reason for the city to be dictating that. As Mr. Shoup points out, none of the planning, as many tables and their thick documents of tabulations of how much parking each use should have, none of those are backed up by any science at all. This was a shock to me. I just assumed that was the case. It was also a shock to me that Michigan doesn't have an AICP requirement. I thought planners were required to be certified. I don't know what Lansing's status is in that regard. That's not taking a poke at anybody. I just don't know. In addition to that, it allows the developers to make better use of the property.
Thank you.
I can do it.
We have Nicholas Pigeon and then Mike Lynn.
Good evening, Commission. My name is Nick Pigeon. I'm a resident of the East Side, and I do run a small nonprofit that looks into and reports on campaign finance research. I'm not here as part of that. I'm here as part of the community. I was kind of intrigued by some of the discussion at the last meeting about the role that money in politics and how PACs spend in at-large districts as compared to ward districts. And I didn't do anything official. All my time right now is looking into the most recent election. But, of course, there was an increase in independent expenditures, direct and indirect, from political action committees for the at-large council people as opposed to the ward council people. As a percentage of, how much raising is and spending is by individual donors versus political action committees, it's much better here in the city than it is when I'm looking at federal candidates and state. But I have had the opportunity to do constituent relations and organizing for a city council member at large and in a city council that is made up of much smaller districts. And I will say that the campaigns and the relationship between council people in a smaller district, the issues were much more localized, and there was much more back and forth between that community versus when I worked for a council person at large. So there was a lot of discussion about what would be the plan if we moved to having more wards, and if you still continue to have at large, and how would you split those districts? I don't think you should do as an exhaustive of a change like the Michigan Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission. I helped collaborate on a report with Michigan State to evaluate how effective they did in drawing their maps, but they had many considerations that they have to follow when they cut the districts for our state and Senate. And maybe looking at some of those and seeing if those apply to Lansing would be beneficial if you do decide to change how the wards look in the city. One of those things where they actually had the public draw maps of what boundaries and what areas that they think are specific communities in the city, right? So that could be something that the public could collaborate on. Another one that they spend a lot of time dealing with is creating districts of opportunity so that in hopes of that the makeup of the council would match as closely as possible demographically to the population of the city. That's one that they spent a lot of time on. So that's something maybe that could be looked at. I'm happy to do more than a precursory research on, how much spending there is in at-large versus ward council people here in the city, but those are my 2 cents.
Thank you. Next we have Mike Lynn and then Heath Lowry.
Hello, Mike Lynn from Lansing, Michigan's downtown. First, I wanted to touch on Dick Peffley stating that politics has no place on their board. I just thought that was interesting, but it can be everywhere else in the city of Lansing, right? Discrimination policy, I want to touch on that. Obviously, with my history with the city of Lansing, having all the policies in place don't matter if you don't do anything about it when you catch it. So I think you guys are gonna have to stretch your minds about what needs to be in this charter. All of that stuff was in place as I went through what I went through here. And even when I brought it to City Hall, it was in place. It would be referenced in front of me. People would say, hey, that's a part of our policy, that shouldn't be happening. And still, here we are, $1 million later, right? So with that being stated, I think something needs to be in place that when the very body that builds the policy is the one discriminating, what happens? That's what we just couldn't figure out. And the only way that actually gets dealt with is going through federal court. And nobody wins in that scenario. So I think that if you guys can stretch your minds, if you need some information on how that might look, I went through 5 years of it. I can help you guys figure that part out. And I think it'll make us all better. I don't think this is anything about anyone in particular. This is not a new issue for the city of Lansing or any city across the country. Discrimination is everywhere, and we just don't know how to deal with it specifically. When people find that they've done it, a lot of times it wasn't intentional, but ultimately it was there. Now how do we protect ourselves and our asset, which is the city, and those are the folks who a lot of times employees go to for help. So the whole thing is governing around how do we protect ourselves and not the individual. So I think the charter needs to reflect protecting the individual who might have been going through that process. Secondary to that, the felony, I think that was a great explanation the lawyer gave about going back to what the Constitution stated compared to what you all have written up, and I think that we might have messed up there. I don't think that I want anybody with 3 or 4 felonies for fraud running office here. I don't care if you have a felony. I'm big on the whole, we want to make sure felons get all the processes. Half my family are felons ultimately, and I want to make sure they can get everything that anybody else has available to them too. But if they're out here robbing stores and so on and so forth and messing up money, I don't necessarily want them running for city council. I mean, that's just the reality of it. So I think that you guys could govern that process that y'all just voted on a little differently to make sure that we do protect ourselves from that. Think of how obvious a mistake that would be if somebody had 3 issues of fraud someplace, but because it wasn't here, you have to place them in a director's position or an officer's position. Just think about that from that perspective. And council seats, I think we can't ever go wrong with more. As an advocate who doesn't get paid to do this stuff, man, what would it be like to have 2 advocates on a side of town that's split by economic and social dependencies, right? So you got people in north of Holmes Road who have all their basic needs taken care of, and everybody south of that are struggling like hell, and the same individual having to help them. I always had this conversation with Adam a lot. How do you govern all of that? How do you govern it, Brian T., when you're over on Moores River Drive, but you still have to deal with Grand River and Willow? So think about that as you guys move forward.
Thank you. Heath Lowry and then Ryan Cost.
Good evening. To continue on my comments from earlier in this, I know there was discussion of research and bringing forward the hard, using that term lightly, science on this. I would suggest going to somewhere like University of North Carolina's School of Governance. They've aggregated data and studies and scholarship on this exact issue, wards versus at-large, and how that affects city council or the city's governance in general. That's where I got a lot of my statements tonight from as well. And I also wanted to bring forward this idea of the city-based ideals of an at-large position. Right now, at-large and city-based ideals, or like that broad city ideals, have a larger than half power in our city government because the mayor is at-large and provides a lot of those interests of I'm thinking about the whole city. That is a co-equal branch with the city council in making policy for this city. So there's an outsized amount of power being placed in this. Let's ignore the small political powers and pay attention to the larger political powers for the sake of efficiency in our city as it currently stands. Thank you.
Thank you. And next we have Ryan Cost.
Ryan Cost, East Side. So I heard a lot of folks talking about the structure of city council, and I don't want to give you what my thoughts are on it. That's not my place, but let me just kind of give you a day in the life of someone that serves the first ward. So in the first ward, I have, if I jump in my car, and I do this frequently, I could end up in Northtown, and then East Village, and then I'm sorry, I start on the east side where I live. Then Grossbeck, then Potter Walsh, then Baker Denora, then Fabulous Acres, then Moores Park School, or Moores School, I said it right, Moores Park School neighborhood, which I'm not sure if they have an active neighborhood group, Green Oaks, Ballpark District, and then North Lansing. I've got 43,000 miles